New property launched from the whale today. That is Walick or Alec Van Beek. If you don't know who that is, it makes me think you don't spend a lot of time on the Lofty Discord. This is his third co-ownership property, but he's also managing somewhere around 60 properties on the platform, based on what he said. And that looks pretty much right. I don't know if it was 60 doors or 60 properties. But he's taken over management of quite a few of them. Um, oh yeah, what's up, YouTube? It's Joe Catchpolia sitting on the couch, making some money, investing in fractional real estate online, as usual. So let's jump right into this property. It's a 3 bedroom, 1 bath, 960 square foot home, built in the 1960s. In I think this is I don't know if this is Dunedin or Dunedin, Florida. I know there's another, this city exists in another country and it's Dunedin. I don't know how they say it in Florida. Um, anyway, uh, it's a long-term rental. It's with a rent in place. It looks like Alec bought it about a year ago, maybe a little bit, maybe a little bit less or a little bit more. I don't know exactly. Um, it just launched today, and there's already been a ton of sales. It looks like he's sold over $20,000 worth of tokens already. Um, what are we doing, guys? Did everybody do a full due diligence on this property before they bought into it? Or did they say, "Oop, it's an Alec property. His other two properties have done well for me. Let me just buy this one." I think most of you did that, right? I think there's a lot to look into, and although I guess it's possible because we've known this one was coming for a while, but we didn't have all the docs and everything available until today. But maybe a lot of the backup, a lot of the research was done with just a couple of finishing touches. I don't know. Maybe this was more anticipated than I realized, and people had access to that. But anyway, hopefully everybody's doing their own due diligence, really digging into everything. I own the Andover property. That's one of his co-ownership properties. It's done very well for me. I own several properties where Walick is the manager. Um, for the most part, I'm pretty happy with how he does things. I think he's very, he tries to be very transparent. Um, my only hesitation in like just fully endorsing him is I think sometimes he's moving very fast, and so sometimes misses stuff and whatnot. And I think it's going to happen when you have a new company that goes from managing two or three to managing 60 properties in a short period of time. I also think that his risk preference is just so much different than mine. He has taken on a lot of debt. He borrowed money from one of the DAOs recently, although he just mentioned that he's going to be able to pay it back. Pretty sure it's being paid back from these proceeds. I don't fault him. He's trying to save several properties at the moment, and so I understand how he's gotten a little bit overextended. Um, but that was a conscious choice, right? And it's well beyond the comfort zone that I have, where I would never put any of my personal assets at risk to take the next property and the next property. I think you should always be investing from a position of strength. From, okay, I don't need this deal, but I have the cash, and do I want to do the next deal? Um, I know, especially when you're first starting out, it's really hard to keep that mindset. I don't think that's him, though. I mean, I think although I don't know that he owns a ton of properties himself, I think he's probably pretty wealthy, right? Why am I talking so much about him versus the property right now? Well, as we dig into this, I think we're going to see that investing in this property is more a bet on him than it is in the property itself, right? But let's dig in. Okay, so first we're going to look at the market. I did do a short video when I bought into the other one that he owns. I'm not sure how much I actually went into the market. Um, the city itself has been up and down, and it looks like it's going down a little bit again in population. This is the number one thing that I like to look at with residential properties. Um, it's a very small total population size, though, so I'm not sure how much this fluctuation really matters. I mean, if you look at it, it's really only, I mean, it's less than 200 people difference, right? And so How much does that really matter? I'm not sure. I usually try to avoid smaller markets, but this isn't a small market, right? It's within this larger Tampa, St. Petersburg, Clearwater MSA, and the MSA is rather large and been growing very well. So, um, I'm pretty comfortable with this market. I don't know why the city itself has shrunk a little bit. But like I said, I mean, when you have real small markets like that, um, you could just have one small change. You could have an apartment building that got closed down because they're going to redevelop a site, or there's all these different reasons that could make a couple hundred people move out. So it doesn't worry me too bad, but I'd much, especially now if the market as a whole was doing poorly as well, then I'd be a lot more concerned. So that's the extent of what I did looking into this market this time. One of the things you can see that has the property values in this zip code have declined 7% over the last year. That's a pretty solid decline. I think this is important because if you think about it, if you look at the purchase, it looks like he purchased this for 308,000. It's being brought to the platform for $331 or 331,800. So we're paying a premium over that purchase price, and it appraised for 316. And then we're paying an additional 5%. Where so maybe he bought it and it was a great deal at 308, but where the market, the average prices have gone down so much, it does worry me a little bit, right? Like from a valuation perspective. Before we jump into valuation, though, I just want to knock out some of the easy ones. Um, oh yeah, I was just looking at the public records documents. I thought this was interesting. They actually have permits. You can see there was like $9,000 worth of electrical permits pulled in 2024. I'm really interested to know what that is because when we look through the inspection, it still looks like there's some electrical issues. And then it looks like the roof was done in 2017. Now, one thing that I'm not sure, because I'm not familiar with this county's, how they actually do these, is does it was this has this been completed, right? Like when maybe if I click on this, leaving this tab, or tab will open. Okay. Um. Oh, and now that's stuck. I should have opened that beforehand. But I'm not sure when you have those if it's going to tell you like it was actually complete, who did it, when it was done. Oh, look at this. Okay, adding the following work: 500 amp, 240 to bring four wiring code. Um, issue date, expiration date, finalized date. Um, apply date, finalized date. I don't know why we have an expiration date going on here. Did this not get done? Applied date, issue date, finalized date. That's weird. I don't know. This is, it might be something that you want to ask them if you're going to put a lot of money into this one. I actually, when we look through the inspection, there are outstanding questions with the electrical. But yeah, it looks like there was a roof put on in 2017. That seems like, oh, that'd be great, relatively new roof. If we were looking at like the typical shingles that we are used to seeing, but this is a flat roof. Well, it's not a flat roof, but it's not shingles. It's like I always forget what this is called. When I know I've done a couple of videos with this, and every time I'm like, oh, I don't remember what it's called. I've had this type of roofing before, um, and it is, it doesn't tend to last, the same length of time. Let's see if we can find it as, your shingle roofs, your traditional shingle roofs. Let's see if we can find a picture. Well, come on. We're going to go through this in a little bit more detail in a minute, but yeah. So this type of roof, right? So it looks like this was done 2017. On the bright side, it is usually cheaper to redo this than than when you're using traditional shingles. But I have found that you tend to replace this more often, or at least have to do repair sooner. So, even though that's 2017, yeah, this type of roof is only 12 to 14-year life expectancy. So yeah, we still have 2017, so it's only 8 years. So you have some useful life left, but it's a lot less than if it was a typical 30-year roof. So anyway, wanted to point that out. Um, oh, but I was looking at this to see when he bought it. Yeah, May of last year. So a bit over a year. Okay, let's see. Looking at the flood map, it looks like it's good here, right? You can see lots of flooding areas around here, but nothing, no shaded areas right where the property is. Was glad to see that. This is one of the better crime maps that we've seen almost anywhere. Um, in a lot of different properties that we look at. It took um, over a week, right? 9 days to come up with all these crimes. And you can see it's pretty zoomed out, right? Like I have to zoom in a decent amount to get into the neighborhood. And so once you're actually in the neighborhood, you do have a theft. And then you have these, I always hate when they have these others because I don't want to click into every single one to figure out what they are. But yeah, this was, a domestic disturbance or domestic violence. So that's not really related to, like, that's not a risk if we're over, in our own property. What's this one here? Neighbor problem. Oh, that's a funny description for on the crime map, right? So anyway, I liked that a lot. I thought that looked good. I wanted to check the elevation just because we're so close to the ocean. I don't know why this is popping up here now, but it looks like 34 feet. Um, I checked with a couple different maps. I don't have one that I use all the time that I like. I know there was one I had for a while, but it seems like it's glitchy now. 34 feet, so yeah, if we're thinking about like, hurricane storm surge, I think we're perfectly fine as far as that goes. Some of the people in the Discord talk about Florida, rising sea levels, and if that's the sort of thing you're worried about, I think 34 feet were probably pretty good for a while there too. Okay, let's see what else. Oh yeah, I wanted to jump into the valuation. Um, Sold for 308. Uh, let's see. This is Realtor thinks it's worth 314.6, so that looks pretty good. Um, Zillow has it at 286, so that was a little bit worrisome, but well within the range. They also have a rent estimate of over $2,000. It's currently rented for $17.99 plus $75 in pet rent, so maybe there's some room to move it up, or maybe Zillow doesn't know exactly what they're talking about here. It's something we'll take a look at. Um, and then Redfin has it, has a significantly higher price. So that, and then, oh, we're going to also look at the appraisal. Yeah, and the appraisal has it at 316,000. Now, obviously, if you're going to put much money into this, you want to really dig into what they're doing. I liked that this appraisal also had a market rent amount, and they said 1866. That's very close to our 1874 that we're collecting once you throw in pet rent. So I feel pretty good about our market rent. It seems like that what we're getting is an appropriate amount. Let's see. Oh, but let me, before I continue, please like and subscribe. Um, Please do your own due diligence on this property and any of the properties you see me talk about investing in. I do include links in the description to this video to all the sites where I currently buy fractional real estate. But just because I'm using one of those platforms doesn't mean that you should. You want to do your own due diligence on those platforms and on any property that I mention in any of these videos. And also, I've got a Discord set up where we talk about a lot of different platforms. There's a link to that in the description to this video as well. Okay, so as far as this is the inspection report summary, which I thought was pretty interesting. You don't really see this as a separate document very often. I thought that was pretty useful, but I actually want to go through the whole inspection report because Alec has owned this property for over a year. And, he's struck me as someone who's really proactive in taking care of property. So I was pretty surprised by the condition of this one. It's not as bad as a lot that we've seen, but there were several little things that are worrisome to me. Well, and this isn't a condition thing, but there is no central air or central heat, so we're operating off all window units, and that's according to I don't know if that was the inspection that said there was none of either, or if it was um, in the appraisal. But one of them said that there was no centralized heat or air, and you can see we have window units everywhere. Um, I'm surprised that's allowed in, where they are. I've been in a lot of markets where, you don't have to have central AC, but you have to have a heat source other than window units. I guess maybe Florida's pretty warm, so they don't care about that. I don't know. But so let's see. What are some of the areas that I actually was concerned about? Um, there's and there was nothing too major. Okay, so one, yeah, I mean, you have like little things like this, like that are damaged, that would be fantastic if those things were addressed. I think obviously it's an old home. It's not going to be perfect. But one of the things I think I've talked about quite a bit is whenever you're making investment, right? You have to compare, okay, what are we getting for the price that we're buying here? And compare it to, okay, what are the alternatives in the marketplace? And at least in my market, that so when I get into the financials later, you can buy a very similar cap rate property in my market that's brand new construction. And so, um, similar rent to price ratio, actually better rent to price ratio, but because our taxes are higher, similar cap rate. Um, but brand new construction, and so you end up having significantly lower repair and maintenance costs. And so when I start to see, okay, it seems like there's a lot of deferred maintenance, it makes me think, well, why would I want to invest in this versus that, right? And so that's what I'm always trying to compare things to, and especially when I'm thinking about long-term rentals. My mindset always goes to the brand new construction properties that we're building all over San Antonio. You can buy something similar in size to this. It would be a 3 bedroom, 2 bath, but you can get close to 1,000 square feet or a little bit bigger for under 200,000. Your rent's going to be a little bit lower, but not that much. Very similar cap rate. If you ignore the fact that this is going to have higher repairs and maintenance than a brand new construction. So anyway, these whenever you have stuff like this, I just feel like this is just a lawsuit waiting to happen. There's no good reason to just have loose bricks anywhere on your property. I'm guessing this was probably a fire pit at some point because it's just set up in the backyard, or just a little sitting area. But if you're going to have them, I mean, they should just be level and tight. So that's one thing that really I don't like to see. One, they talk about the water runoff is eroding some of there's some erosion near the foundation. There are no, there's no gutters, and so it's a relatively cheap thing to add gutters, compared to the price of a home, and especially compared to the price of fixing a foundation. And so I'd love to see those be added. They also mention, that they are just, that they have a negative slope. It's moving water towards the building. And so, fixing that I think is also helpful. Obviously, this property's been here for a very long time. It's survived so far, but the number one thing, if you're especially for a buy and hold deal, I'm always worried about, okay, where's the water infiltrating the property? How do we stop that? Because that's a lot of the damage that just gets really expensive as far as structural stuff comes from not managing our water properly. Um, you've got a lot of these little things. I mean, this doesn't bother me too much. This is cosmetic for the most part, but it is again, it does let moisture in, right? Just like they're saying. Um, yeah, you've got lots of little spots of this. This actually looks pretty rough, but we didn't get a zoom in on it, so I'm not actually sure. Yeah, I guess right here. So it looks like maybe this is just paint peeling. Maybe this is actually rotten wood that we're already getting. Um, I really hate to see when people, it looks like the vent was painted over at some point in time. It's a vent. It should it should be able to breathe. You can see, okay, we've got some rotten wood that looks like this maybe was just painted over. Sometimes it's not really that bad and you can just paint it and seal it. There's no way to tell without getting your hand on that though. Um, which is one of the things that bothers me about, and it's one of the reasons why I try to scrutinize these things so much is because when you can't visit the property in real life, it's easy to miss a lot of stuff, right? I mean, whenever I'm going to visit a property in real life, I'm putting my hands on everything, right? I'm touching door frames, touching window sills. You can feel, okay, is this squishy? I'm feeling how the property feels when I'm walking through it. Is there a slope? Is there squishiness or creakiness? And so, we don't have that So what we really have to do is use all the clues that we have, right? We're looking at the property. Um, but let's see. That's really all I want to say about that. Yeah, it appears like there's some problem with the roof, right? It's a minor one, it seems like, but where you have it, the roof is lifting at the drip edge, and then there's a gap between the roof and the decking. Certainly, over time can cause problems. Um, I mentioned this type of roof. I really just hate these types of roofs. I don't know, they are. I think they're just cheaper. I think I only ever had one property with this. Um, Mine was a completely flat roof. Was it really? It wasn't actually. I mean, I feel like it was just very similar to this. And it just seemed like it just always had problems. You have to replace it a lot more often than a regular roof. But this was done in 2017. It looked like so. If you based on this age, maybe we're about halfway through the useful life, maybe a little bit more. What else? Oh yeah, there was electrical issues that surprised me that these are just being allowed to stand. So, you know, whenever you have exposed wiring anywhere, it's not like the exposed metal, but the wire itself, excuse me, you can actually see. It should be, there should be some management of this. It just causes a hazard if somebody gets their hand on it, they pull it out, it gets hit by something, nicked, some way like that. That can be problematic. The other thing that I noticed somewhere in here is that it mentioned that there was aluminum wiring. I know I've had a very difficult time getting insurance when I've had aluminum wiring. It's not all aluminum, some of it's copper, but there were mentions that there was some aluminum wiring in the home. Yes, service wire is aluminum. One of the things that I would want to make sure if I was going to invest in this is that the insurance company is aware of the fact that there's aluminum wiring, because when you go through your little questionnaire, a lot of people miss that. And if you ended up having a fire and it was due to this, which is the reason aluminum wiring causes problems, is because it expands and contracts more with changing in temperature, and so your connections, where your wires shrink and expand, inside, inside the little outlets, uh, because there's that movement, you end up having sometimes uh, issues with where the wire's connected, and you get some arc. And this is just all from me reading online and running into this issue with lots of home purchases and having to talk to tons of insurance companies about it. So, one, it's something that should be disclosed if a fire ends up happening because of the aluminum wiring, and it's something that you didn't tell the insurance company about. You're at risk of not getting your claim paid out because of it, right? Because you basically weren't paying for the appropriate risk that you were taking. Um, and so that's something that I'd want to make sure, like, hey, is this something that was disclosed to the insurance company? Uh, when getting the policy, because like I said, at least in my market, there's a lot of insurance companies that won't even give you homeowners insurance with aluminum wiring in the home. And so, I mean, there's a lot that will, but there are some that will not do it. And so, you know, I just want to know, make sure that that's actually been disclosed to the insurance company. Other than that, I think there wasn't a whole lot else. I don't love that, that you just have window units only. I'm a real estate snob a little bit, but I think it's one of the things that um, you very often, you'll still rent it, right? Like you'll get a property in there, but it's the type of property that most tenants are going to move to a nicer place as soon as they can afford to. That's just what I've experienced when, most people just prefer central AC. I think it just creates a nicer look on the outside. It creates a nicer, continuous experience in the home. And so, it's something that I've most of the time I've avoided properties that have window units only. Not 100% of the time, but I find that, especially at least here in town, you're definitely going to rent them slower, or you're going to have more turnover. Like, it's just one of the things that a lot of tenants, notice, look for as an issue right away. This is one of the other things, is there is cast iron plumbing. which is super common, right? Like this is a 1960s property. I've owned a lot of properties with cast iron plumbing. Whenever I've run into this, when I've done inspections, really want to do a sewer scope. When this is brought up, I've had to replace these before. It's a lot of money to do it, and it's something that you just know. Okay, they're supposed to last 50 to 75 years. This home was built in the 1960s. We're close to the end of that, right? We're past the 50, getting close to the 75. And it's a relatively low cost thing to do is to get your sewer scope done. Now we can do them for a couple $100 here in town. I don't know what they cost there, but it lets you know, are we at risk? So usually it's not something that we do with every property that we inspect, but if I inspected this property for my own purchase and I saw this note that we have cast iron pipes, it would definitely be the next thing that I would do is get that sewer scoped. Um, it's an electrical water heater now that used to have gas, and it looks like the gas line is shut off but not capped, so that was an issue. Um, I think most of this other stuff was kind of, oh yeah, and the same thing like they mentioned the tub. It's original and rusted, and maybe there was leaks at some point in time. They didn't think it was currently leaking. Not a big deal. Like a lot of this stuff, I don't know. It is a lot of the little things like the wires. I think of that as a little thing. I don't. I really sort of thought that he'd be on top of. So surprised by that. This is something it's not necessarily an inspection issue, but it is the tiny stoves. I hate these. I feel like um, again, it's something that a tenant will live with if it's the only property that works for them. But most tenants, when they can, they're going to look for a place with a bigger stove, or full size oven. It says just a three-bedroom, one bath, and it's 960 square feet. So, maybe you're not having a ton of people live in this home. But then the other thing too is like, look at this counter. Like this looks like I cut this out to put this in here. And when you have to replace this, small appliances, you think, oh, they're going to be cheaper. They're never cheaper. I've had to replace a lot of small appliances because they're more of like a specialty or niche size. You usually end up paying at least as much as you pay for the full size, and sometimes a lot more. So I really don't like these like, three-quarter size appliances, unless you just absolutely have to do them. Maybe there's not a fit in this one, but obviously it's like this when he bought it. It wasn't a choice that he made. But all of these things, I think, tend to lead to more turnover. Whenever you have issues that are, that make the home not make it, I don't want to say worse than market, but like, if the average appliances in the market are full size appliances and this home happens to have three-quarter size ones or smaller, it's something that people are going to settle for now, but as soon as they can afford to, are going to go somewhere else. And so that's one of the things. A lot of times you will rent places and you'll get a decent rent, um, but you'll end up with more turnover over certain issues versus like other ones. You see the impact in the actual rent amount or the speed of renting more often. And so there's certain things that I think like people kind of overlook when they're looking at it as a whole, or they don't realize just how much it's going to bother them until they get into the home if they haven't rented something similar before. Um, and then the other thing too is I'd really like, let's see, was this one done for, yeah, prepared again for Alec, right? I mean, I just don't know why Lofty isn't getting these reports done for the DAO versus for the co-owner. I mean, this is the person who's selling this to us. Do I think Alec is trying to sneak anything past us? I don't. I mean, I think he's really shown that he's basically willing to lose his own money to try to do the right thing for some of the DAOs, or at least put it at risk, right? I mean, so it's not that I think that he's trying to do something underhanded, but in general, I would like Lofty to have these reports, have them done for the benefit of the DAO, not of the person bringing the property to the platform. Oh, this is a property management agreement. He's doing this for 6%. That's fantastic, right? And we know, we know the quality of manager that he is. If you own, any of the other 60 plus or 60 plus or minus properties that he's managing on the platform, he's in the Discord almost daily. Maybe he is in the Discord daily. Sometimes on the weekends, he doesn't respond super fast, but I mean, that's, I think he's a normal human that has, has other things that he does in life too. Um, but anyway, I think yeah, one of the most responsive people in there, certainly more so than any of the third-party management companies that we had. So to get that kind of service at 6%, pretty happy with that. Okay, so now what are my main issues here? Okay, well, this is just the lease. Obviously, whenever you have this, you want to read through the lease. They have the rent listed as the 1874. Um, or when they're calculating this. So let's see, 1874 times 12. That's how we get to this 22,488. So that's including the pet rent. That's one of the things I always like to check. And so sometimes you think you get to that pet rent because it's going to cost you extra to get the property back up to a rent ready condition because of the pet. But he also has a $900 non refundable pet deposit, and a regular security deposit. So um, I think that pet rent is really just extra income, and so I'm perfectly happy calling that just part of the rent, right? In some instances where you don't also have this non-refundable pet deposit, or you have maybe a minimal security deposit, I really think that pet rent is just covering the extra cost that it's going to have. You're going to run into a turnover, and so I don't like necessarily including it in those instances. Um, there wasn't really much else I wanted to mention about this. Let's see. But so okay, this is though my real problem with this and why I'm not going to be buying into this at the moment. So when we look at the financials, and I'm just taking them at face value. Again, Lofty, they never put, this is just like a 1 month annualized. So we don't have any repairs and maintenance put into here. We don't have any vacancy collection loss. I always want to see those two things, right? But in general, taking them at face value without that, they say this is a 4.5, a 5.45 cap. I think if you really normalized it with those two things, you end up even below five. Certainly better than some of the properties we've seen on the platform. But again, if I compare, I can somewhere between a 5 and a 5.5 cap. I can get brand new construction here in town, and that spits out the same cap rate, the same amount of income. And that's and when I'm looking at that, I'm already putting in my, some repairs and maintenance budget, although small because it's new, and some vacancy collection loss. So I think that's, um, when I'm comparing it to other options I have for long-term rental, I don't really love that with, an older property with some deferred maintenance. Um, so there's that. But the real issue that I have is, okay, taking this annual cash flow, right? 18,171. Divide that by 12. That's $1,514.25 a month. So that's with no vacancy collection loss and with no repairs and maintenance. This is how much money the property is bringing in every month. Well, let's look at the loan docs. Oh, this is just the principal in interest payment on the loan, right? So let's look at that. Oh, whoop, I lost it. I lost my little calculator. There we go. We're actually losing about 50 bucks a month. The property is, when you look at the NOI compared to just the principal and interest, right? Well, and it makes sense to just look at the principal and interest because we don't want to look at taxes and insurance because that would be um, double counting because it's already baked into our expenses for the NOI. So this is right? So in a perfect month where we have no repairs and maintenance and we have no vacancy collection loss, this property on its own loses 50 bucks a month. Now, we're making an 18% yield. That's because Alec is picking up this payment, right? He's making this payment, and this is the Lofty co-ownership model that we see over and over again, where the DAO is not paying for the mortgage. And I'm fine with that if we're using it to juice returns, right? But if we're using it as the only reason we're making returns, it's really worrisome, right? Like, so in a situation where the Dow had to take over this payment, we would be losing money every single month. And you might say, well, that's not going to happen because, it is happening with other co-ownership properties, but Alec is the one who's jumping in and trying to fix that, right? And that's true. But the solution to that, and for some of them, has been for the Dow to pay, which means more cash has to be brought in, and you know. But the real issue is, okay, what if something happens to him, right? What if we've already seen, if you're paying attention in the Discord, that at the moment his personal financial situation is being stretched. Um, as I mentioned earlier, he had to borrow a significant amount of money from one of the DAOs to sort of cover until he could sell some of this equity. That's a worrisome position for me, right? Like and I don't know, I don't know anything about his personal financial situation other than what he shares on there. I don't think he's in dire straits or anything. It seems like he has a lot of cash because he has a lot of equity in many of these properties. Although he has a lot of equity in a lot of properties that are not doing tremendously well. Um, but I think if you just, one of the what I want to do always is look at this property on its own, right? Could this property manage its debt if something happened to him, he's not able to pay it? The answer is, clearly no, right? And so, okay, we are getting this yield, but this yield is just coming 100%, due to the financial engineering. None of this yield is actually coming from the income from the property relative to the debt. And so, looking at this debt further, it's a 7.125% interest rate. And we talked about, okay, this is very generously a 5.45 cap. So it's dilutive debt anyway, right? Like, meaning you'd be better off to buy this property all cash. Your yield would be better, you know, ignoring this setup that we have on Lofty. But the yield would be better to buy this property all cash than to buy it with this interest rate. So, um, one of the things whenever I see stuff like this is like, okay, well, why would Alec do this, right? What is the goal? And I know for a lot of people, it's they want to control as many properties as possible. They're trying to grow a portfolio. They believe that rents are going to continue to grow. They believe that interest rates are going to come down. At some point in the future, this property will be profitable. And I believe that. I think on average that's going to be true. But I think it's a level of risk. Unless you had really significant reserves, I'd be worried with that. That level of risk would worry me quite a bit um, on one property. And then if you start to multiply that by multiple properties, um, I never like to take dilutive debt, right? If I'm going to borrow money, I want my cap rate to be higher than my interest rate. And really, I want it to be higher than my debt constant, right? Which is, includes the amortization as well. That way it's accretive to both the deal itself, but also accretive to the cash on cash, right? And so I'd want a really good story why I'm using dilutive debt on something like this. And maybe it is, oh, I believe this market is going to appreciate rapidly. It's not what we've seen so far, but I think it's something that you could believe because of the growth in the market as a whole. Or, I very strongly believe that the interest rate's going to come down, so I'm going to be able to refinance. Okay, great. Is it going to come down below 5.45 anytime soon? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But again, I mean that level of risk is just it's not for me, right? I'm very uncomfortable with that. And so even though with the current setup, somebody else is paying this mortgage, right? Alec is paying the mortgage, not us as the DAO. I just always want to look at the fundamentals of the property and see what happens in the case that he's not making that payment. And I think now we've seen enough examples of that. I was talking about this uh, 6 or 8 months ago, and people were like, "Oh, but he has to. He's got a contract. He's supposed to pay it." Well, now we've seen a bunch of examples of people that couldn't, either couldn't or wouldn't pay the mortgage that they had originally agreed to. And so, this is not just like a theoretical risk. Even though, I think that Alec is doing a great job of what he's trying to do on the platform. He's not immune to risk, right? He's not, you can't, uh, I think one of the things that even a lot of smart operators seem to be blind to is just the trap that leverage is, right? There's leverage does not add value ever. It just amplifies um, your results, right? And so so when things go really well, it amplifies that. When things go very poorly, it amplifies that. And unfortunately, it tends to amplify the downside further because you can get to zero um, very quickly when you're over leveraged. Um, we're seeing that in a lot of the DAOs that there's this risk of that. And yeah, uh, is it possible to operate a business like this with dilutive debt and just grow your way out of it and end up with a huge portfolio 20 years down the line? I think it's possible if everything goes well. I've just seen it go poorly so many more times. There's a reason that there are very few older real estate investors that are also highly levered real estate investors. A lot of the people that actually survive through downturns are ones that don't have high leverage, aren't using dilutive debt and or maybe like I mean in the 2008 timeframe, I had a lot of leverage. I had several properties that I bought with 100% financing, and managed to not lose anything just out of pure hustle. And, the fact that my wife also worked helped us get through that. And, making deals and, uh, selling properties on the side, all sorts of different things made it so I could get through that, but also made me realize like, oh, the level of risk I was taking was just absolutely absurd. And, that we're not there on here, right? But what's interesting is even though I had higher LTVs than what we're seeing here, because this is a relatively low LTV, um, 232,000, but my debt coverage ratios were way better than this, and so that's where we really have a problem now is and where we'll see cash crunches now. Yes, it's a relatively low loan to value, so the solution, it adds a margin of error for us if something did happen and Alec couldn't make that payment. Well, then we could sell the property and not lose everything, but we'd certainly lose some money because right now we're paying a premium over the appraised value. There would be closing costs, and that's assuming that the appraised value is a good value, even though it's higher than the purchase price a year ago, and the market's gone down as a whole, and all those things, right? And so I guess all this very long-winded video is, in a nutshell, if you're investing in this, you're just making a bet on Alec, right? You're making a bet on his ability to continue to operate these properties and to continue to pay the mortgages, even though he's not making enough from the properties to pay these mortgages. And I mean, maybe that's not the case for all of them. I have to go back and look at Andover because that was one of my earlier purchases, and I was probably not looking into some of these issues deep enough when I bought that one. Over time, as I've really understood the structure more, um, I was missing a lot of this stuff early on as far as like exactly how it worked. But yeah, I think that you're just making a bet on him, right? And if, to get an 18% yield and then maybe some appreciation if it appreciates, although again, you're buying at a premium to the current value, so you need a lot of appreciation to actually make money from that side of things. Plus you get the dilution as he pays down the mortgage. Um, so if you want to do that, maybe lend him money at 18%. I don't know. I don't know if he'd be willing to do that. If you think about like, because I'm talking about, we're always looking for what's the alternative investment, right? And this is not really a real estate play buying into this. This is I'm making a bet on his ability to continue to make those payments. Um, because we know as soon as that disappears, the Dow, the property, just with the Dow, can't handle the debt, right? So then you're just selling. And so, this is very similar to, there's been several properties where I've had to make this comment. Other co-owners, it's really common on Lofty in general. We're just not getting, I mean, 5.5 is actually a better cap rate than we've seen on many. It's still just a little too low to make sense with the current, with the debt the way it is. Oh, and that's one of the things I keep mentioning, like, oh, you can get these new constructions with a similar cap rate. So, and the repair and maintenance is lower. One of the things I forgot to mention, but I think is a huge benefit, in addition to that, you're typically getting much lower interest rates on those because the lenders are buying down your debt, right? So when you're looking at those as alternative investments, you can get a brand new property, uh, in a market that I would think is similar as far as like, I don't know, I haven't that I'd be at least as excited to be invested in. But maybe some people just like this Florida market more. But and get so you get the new property, you get a similar cap rate, and you get much better debt, right? And when you put all those things together, it's hard to understand. It's hard for me to get excited about this deal, um, because it does just feel like, okay, this is just a bet on the operator. It's a bet on his personal finances, his ability to continue to make those payments. Um, Over time, I mean, you can just see like I just don't like the structure at all, right? What's funny is it's how I started, right? When I first approached the platform, I didn't like the structure with the co-ownership and the debt outside of it. I got a little bit comfortable with it sometime in the middle. I don't mind it when it is juicing our returns. If this property covered the debt healthily, if we had a 1.25% debt service coverage ratio, and then and then to make the deal even better, we use this co-ownership model where somebody else pays them the mortgage. I'm completely on board with that, right? Like, okay, but if the property fundamentally doesn't work, if the debt that's attached to the property doesn't work from a fundamental perspective, and then we're using this financial engineering to make it, to make the profits better, or to make profits exist at all, that's just really hard for me to get behind. Um, I think that's really it, though. I think, I know a lot of you bought this. I'm sure it's just a vote of confidence for Alec. I don't want to take anything away from him. Hopefully, uh, you know, like I said, I mean, I'm in a bunch of properties he manages. I own one of his other co-ownership properties. But I just want to be completely honest about like what I think the situation is, right? If you're buying this, it's not that this is an exciting real estate investment. And so it does a little bit worry me to see. I mean, I think it's good to see that this is selling out so much faster than the doggy daycare, because I think from a fundamental numbers perspective, it makes a little bit more sense in some instances. Although, if you look at, yeah, I don't know, but I think it makes sense to buy this one over that one. Again, you want to do your own due diligence on that. But I think that it's worrisome from the perspective of, I think a lot of the purchases that have gone into this one so far are just a halo effect, or just a bet on Alec. I'm curious how many of the people that bought into this one really dug into all these different aspects of the property, um, and came up to the decision that, yeah, this is one I'm excited about. Let's go. Uh, or is it just like, hey, 18% yield? That's all I see, right? And the pictures, and we don't even have the pictures are okay, right? There's actually quite a few that are virtually staged that look kind of funny. Um, when you realize, oh yeah, this was the other thing. So this is, okay, this is a ceiling fan that has like this external wire to it. I've seen like hanging lights like that, but to do it with a ceiling fan seems crazy. I don't know why. It seems more so. But yeah, they just take it out with the virtual staging. They just like took out the vent and made this a flat top with that. So I don't know. You know, uh, I'm curious if people have looked at this and even realized that that's what's going on, or if they just see 18%. I know Alex running it. I'm just gonna stick some money in there. Uh, yeah, hopefully we can all be friends after this because I know lots of you guys put money into this. Um, I am curious, is there something on the fundamental side of this deal that you think I'm missing? Is there some value add that maybe exists that I'm unaware of? Or, are you making the bet that I'm, that I outlined? That's it for me for today. Until next time, I'm going to just keep being an old curmudgeon so that you don't have to.